We can start. Earl's here. We can start now. Okay. 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 Yeah. I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7:02 p.m. We'll take a moment of silence to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'll have the coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Dixon.
Present.
Mr. Rollins. Mr. Scrivano.
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch.
Here.
Mr. Siegel.
Here.
Mr. Connor.
Here.
With 6 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank Rod and Connor, who are in the back and helping with the behind-the-scenes work to produce our board meeting on broadcast channel 20. So thank you guys. As always, you do a great job. I don't believe we have any speakers. Okay, so I don't have to read that. So I'll ask at this time then, are there board member comments? Mr. Dixon.
Yes, I just want to echo what the district said about McIntosh and how we are going to try to replace that before school starts, and that our condolence, really.
Thank you. Mr. Connor?
Same topic, but a little different take. To the cowards out there that did this, I hope you are caught, and the punishment, I don't know, can't fit. It's terrible. Targeting children, targeting playgrounds where families spend their time in constructive interaction, and it's such a positive for our community. So I'm really, this one truly makes me mad. I just, I can't believe that somebody, and you are a coward. You aren't listening to this, but you are a coward.
Thank you. Mr. Siegel.
A little different spin on the same theme. I kept thinking about this incident as I was going through the board agenda and reading about a lot of the contracts we're going to approve tonight, and how each of these contracts really takes the school into extraordinary territory, not just delivering the education that we're required and expected to deliver to kids, but in really involving the community, involving partners, involving higher education, providing great opportunities for our students from college level down to early childhood. And we have initiatives going to help kids in their first 1,100 days. If this act was in any way some sort of a statement somebody was making to say, well, the school district isn't doing their job and I'm going to make them hurt just a little bit, we are doing our jobs. And we are doing a lot of really tremendous things, and setting our playgrounds and our dumpsters on fire not only isn't helping us, you're really hurting us. And I don't understand it. I think it's incredibly offensive, and it needs to stop.
Thank you. We'll move on then to our next agenda item, which is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
I will be, thank you, and I will be deferring my comments to Dr. Vosberg, our Deputy Superintendent, to preview the Consolidated Contract update, which is a new process that we've implemented, and we will also be giving the internal audit report. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Vosberg.
Thank you. Before I begin, I want to thank, there's a lot of people that were involved in the process here to get a lot of contracts processed and things aligned, as I'll discuss in the presentation. So I want to thank Brooke Peterson, Jody Scow, Laura Fromm for all their help. We had about 35 different vendors with 41 schools working feverishly over the last 3 weeks to get things processed. It was a lot of work. Also, Joanne Kirschbaum and Heather Saltis were heavily involved in the work and helped with the presentation. So tonight I want to talk about some things you're going to see in the consent agenda. You'd see in contracts under $10,000, and you also see a few things under new business, where we've decided to consolidate our contracts. So we had a problem with, as a district, with timely and strategic acquisition of resources. So we've got buildings with more and more resources, and depending on how they or when they decide to make a purchase could impact the length of time it takes for them to process those orders and get those products to teachers and to classrooms for students. So a lot of conversations were had about what do we do to help speed up that process, and a little more of the background. As we move to student-based budgets, as you saw in our budgeting cycle this year, more resources were allocated to schools based on their needs. We have schools that often purchase the same things. You might remember seeing things like No Red Ink and Newsella come before you multiple times because we were over the $10,000 threshold. And because of that threshold, it determines the timeline and the nature of the process to purchase that. So schools that are under $10,000 can get the resources pretty quickly, and schools that would go over to $10,000 could have almost a month delay in getting those products and services. So we really saw a need to be more consistent for schools and supporting them to get their resources. We also, over the last couple of years, have developed a menu system. So schools are able to look at items that are pre-vetted from our curriculum department, our I&I department, our technology department, to know what's available and have a menu to select from, again, to make timely and strategic purchases for their schools and for their resources. All the work that we've done with this alignment would fit in with our goals. I think if you look through these contracts, you'll see a connection to all 5 of our goals. But we're heavily focused on Goal 1, growth and achievement, and number 5, fiscal operation and stewardship. So one of the things that we've done over the years is we've always consolidated our contracts for technology. So iPads and Chromebooks, which you'll see tonight in these purchases. We've always worked with the state on a state contract to get a good deal. And just with the purchases you'll see tonight, we're saving the district about $140,000 by consolidating those purchases and going through that state contracting process with CDW. With the other contracts, and you'll see in the purchase services area, you'll see some items that are asterisked. So we had some vendors that may have had requests from 4 or 5 different schools. And where that occurred, we were able to negotiate a volume discount for around $25,000. So total tonight, by consolidating, real cost savings of around $170,000. Some other savings obviously are in time and energy of resources, not having to duplicate the process with creating new contracts for the same vendor multiple times throughout the school year, multiple PRECs processed through our offices down here. So save some man hours. It doesn't seem like it now because we had this mad rush the last couple weeks, but throughout the year, we'll see the benefits of that work. So definitely able to streamline those processes and help the district. Also, I think it aligns well with our goals and our values, specifically continuous improvement and collaboration. Our alternative choices would just be to continue with the status quo. And I'll just give notice that we do have some contracts that we're still working on, so we didn't get them all tonight because it does take time to negotiate those and obviously work with the vendors, work with the schools, work with all of our departments here to get those processed. So we will have a few more contracts come in August, but a majority of them are here tonight for the school year. So this is this is our solution, consolidation of school-based purchases, and this will be a practice we'll continue to develop over time and get more efficient at it, and probably will start a little bit earlier in the process than we did this year. When we consolidated these purchases, we looked at 3 categories to do the work and started our PDSA work. We looked at instructional support and enrichment, learning support, and devices. Instructional support and enrichment really categorized areas of professional development, social emotional learning, bringing in outside agencies to work with students, such as Burpee Museum. Learning support really was heavily concentrated in online technology that supported numeracy and literacy. And then the devices are your Chromebooks and your iPads. So the total cost with all the work that's processed and before you tonight is around $1.9 million. Some of these items are asterisked here because there's items that are under $10,000, so you won't see those itemized because they're in a different part of the report. But as you can see, it's a significant amount of money that was involved, with the heaviest part being the devices with $1.4 million. Our return on investment is a timely and strategic purchase of all these resources. We're able to get these quicker to our schools and to our students. Efficiency in our processing, as I talked about earlier, where we won't have to duplicate PRECs or contracts for the same vendors. And then, as I mentioned earlier as well, the bulk order discounts, where we're realizing some savings when we can negotiate with some of these vendors. Reporting back, so there's really two levels of the reporting back. One is the consolidation process, and that's something we'll schedule a meeting. The core team that I mentioned earlier will meet again in August and kind of review this process and get feedback from the schools on streamlining this process to get better at it, to be even more efficient next year. But then there's also the spend of $1.9 million at the school, and how do we know that we're making a good investment for our students? I know that comes up when we talk about these individual spends. Is this something that's beneficial for students? How do we know this is an effective purchase? Because it is, again, a large sum of money. A couple things that we've done, I think, to help our schools is we are developing a continuous improvement mindset within the schools. So really, we start at the classroom level. As you've seen in some board updates, we are training teachers to use the PDSA process in their classroom. At the end of that cycle, step 9 of that cycle, they are getting feedback from the students, a plus delta exercise where the students are giving feedback. This helped me with my learning target. This didn't help me with my learning target. The teachers are reflecting on that. They're bringing it to their PLCs. The PLCs can reflect on that and really start to look and see at a building level, at a classroom level, what's helping kids, what's not helping kids, and use that throughout the school year as they develop their budgets and talk about purchases for the next year. And we've also tried to build in some systems where we can collaborate amongst different schools throughout the system. As you can see through some of these purchases, 5 or 6 schools are using the same products. So building in some systems where teachers are able to collaborate, principals are able to collaborate, and again, look at their short cycle goals, the progress on MAP, IAR, on track, all those key metrics that you'll see on the scorecard. So really, we're getting better and better at the school level for them to make these school-based decisions. And that's the presentation, again, around consolidating the contracts. There's individual contracts. As you look through those, we can answer those as they come up.
Any comments or questions for Dr. Vosberg? Ms. McCullough.
So I know you don't have to put in under 10K contracts, but to really have a comprehensive report, why wouldn't you?
Well, we have done that in the past. They're in. I believe they're in the within the board report, just not separated out individually.
Pardon? Oh, I know you do, but
Right.
to really have all the contracts together, I mean,
We did
there is
talk,
there is such depth
Yeah.
in the amount of information that is here for us to try to digest.
We did talk about doing that. We just figured we'd keep it the way we've been doing it. And so those
Just
are
because you always did it, that's the way you're going to do it. Okay, just.
we didn't want to
just-
confuse anybody. So we just left it how we've been doing
I
it.
don't think that would have been confusing, Dr. Vosberg. But my other question is this, okay, there's a lot of contracts. It gives a lot of opportunity. Obviously, the schools are going to want to spend the money in the best way they can. There may be, and you talked about PLCs, you talked about multiple schools using a particular contract, but to make sure that they are able to communicate with with each other. Some schools may have more success with it than others, but is that a teacher situation? Is that a student situation? Is it a process? Is it an implementation? Are they all doing it at the same level? So I would not second guess whether or not these are all the right contracts, but what I would like to see next year is that there's some sort of report back to us saying, you know, even if a write-up from the schools that have used, if it didn't help, they wouldn't want to buy it again. But we also should hear when things don't work. You know, it is good information, so that 2 years from now, when you're not standing up there and it comes back again because, like, oh, I think that was the one.
That is a good point, and I think when you talk about what are the scenarios where it can work or not work, it's all the above, and that's what makes the work very challenging. But we do, again, I think, and I think Mr. Rollins brought this up last time, fidelity of implementation is really critical. And if schools are given autonomy to pick what they want to implement, the fidelity will be better. And so that's kind of our goal. We do vet it on the front end to make sure it's aligned to grade level standards, that there's a level of engagement that'll happen for students. And then we give schools flexibility to own the process and own the implementation.
No, and I'm not questioning that. What I'm saying is, I mean, what's 90% of life is communication, right? So are they communicating across schools, across grade levels, across who are using them, why are you more successful? And yes, it might be fidelity of implementation, but it could be something else as well. So thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Connor.
So first, I'm way in favor of this. This is something, frankly, that I know a number of us have harped on for quite a while. What would help, and I just relooked at the PDSAs, is to know what the cost is and what it might have been. And maybe I missed it, but I didn't see that. And I think that really would have helped
Right.
to see what that contrast is. And I know the majority was the Chromebooks, but I still think it's really helpful for us to see,
Right.
the actual numbers.
We can make that adjustment.
Yeah.
It is in most of the invoices will show the discount, but we can summarize that. We should have done that.
If I wanted to read the dictionary for every single word you write, I could find the definition of every word.
But I was
the
working on
point
it.
is, yeah.
It's $168,000 to be exact. if you want the exact
Okay,
number.
but it would be nice to see it, and so that's thing one, please show that contrast. I think the other thing is, from my point of view, there's got to be at least, if not savings in real dollars, staff time, follow-up, invoicing, there's got to be processes that support all this, that this consolidation would help. And even though I wouldn't expect you to do, necessarily dollars on all that, it would be good to see some kind of effort that says it's going to take our time from this to this. I mean, even if it's 10% of the time, because that equates to a lot of things. So that's 2. 3 is I would want to make sure that in your report back to us, that there is a customer service component to this. A lot of these, and, forgive me, some of them are so small on the part of this, and I would assume that part of the thinking here is that we're headed towards all the standards and the curriculum, and you've heard me harp on many occasions, and I'm sure happily, about the notion that we have curriculum and we've got to align it and so forth. There has to be some alignment on this where it will make sense for people. And if this is now a choice and we've got it by school, for example, if their results go up and are a little better, I think, I don't know if it has anything to do with it. It might be a wacky correlation, but one of the exercises I know we do at work is we look at all the vectors and say, which ones may or may not line up. And so this is a big spend, 1.9, and so I would say some sort of reflection on each one of these, because this is quite a litany of schools. So I think something like that would really want to come back. My comment on that one is, we say all the time, essentially, how does all this support up? So if I've got a goal, it would be nice to know how it stair steps up. And I will say this about the Chromebooks. That is such a big part of it. I think one of the things that would be good to know, for example, poor Mr. Bartell has heard me rant and rave about this, so thank you for your patience. But I think having some kind of supporting diagram that would say, here are all the things that we're doing off of this platform, you know, because we now have this and so forth. I think it puts it in perspective for us. So that'd be my comment on this is I'm way in favor of it. I really think it's overdue, but I think there's probably some rigor behind all this that would help formulate both the thinking as we go forward, what's included in it, and then maybe the standards upon which you'll base the report back to us. So.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gray is next.
Good evening. My name is Roman Gray. I'm the internal auditor here for the school district, and I'm here to give a report on the activities of the internal audit function for the fiscal year FY 2019. I'll be giving a brief overview of the function of internal audit, as well as some of the highlights and the updates of audit activity. Internal audit is an internal consulting function in an organization and a collaborative partner, and that's how it functions here within the district. The internal auditor develops an audit universe and a risk assessment worksheet that seeks to identify and quantify the risks to the organization, and this is a document that is continually evolving. Internal controls are analyzed and tested, and recommendations for improvement are developed. Internal audit may conduct audits pertaining to financial, operational, or performance activities, and fraud audits and investigations may also be conducted. Internal controls, also referred to at times as checks and balances, are designed to reduce the risk of undesirable activity in an organization. The intent of segregation of duties is to break up the ability of any one person to both perform an undesirable activity and also to conceal that activity. Testing is then designed to determine whether whether controls and segregation of duties are functioning, and controls are reviewed for effectiveness and compared with recommendations for best practices. When conducting audits and when controls appear to be insufficient or impaired, the internal auditor may analyze existing data for fraud or to determine the impact of known errors. Investigations are also conducted as needed. For the audit activity update, audit activity is currently in progress in these three areas and should be completed by September. The asset audit involves reviewing the classification, depreciation, existence, and disposal of assets, and the tagging and the tracking of assets. The construction audit is an audit of construction purchase orders and expenditures for cost containment and for compliance with established bidding and spending guidelines. And the timekeeping audit is to review time clock usage, accrual deductions, and manual edits to the time punch records. Completed audits. Audits were completed in the areas of accounts payable. $46,323 was identified by internal audit as duplicate payments to vendors, which has all been recovered by finance subsequently. A final report is pending in this area. The vendor master file audit resulted in recommendations for cleanup of data, for data capture, and vendor approval improvements, and a final report is pending. The personnel file audit, a final report is pending here as well. Findings pertain to just a single missing document and possible recommendations to improve processes for obtaining information for personnel files. The IT user security audit was an audit was expanded to cover several key areas in the IT framework with recommendations that address the overall IT framework rather than to look only at user security. And follow-up is prioritized for FY 2020. The employee health benefits audit we'll discuss on this next slide. This audit was published in January, and I'd like to use it as an opportunity to discuss the types of findings that can surface in an internal audit. Reconciliations, data reconciliation issues. Reconciliation is comparing information across two different areas. So reconciliation, for example, employees with benefits being compared to the administrative costs associated with those benefits, or actual insurance benefits that were provided being reconciled with the insurance and elections and premiums that were elected by those employees. There were issues that were identified and recommendations for improvement in areas that involved data reconciliation. Data integrity issues. So is the data good? Internal audit investigated and documented findings here, such as duplicate data, data that was not up to date, errors in premiums paid. There was a documented financial impact of $72,159 in potential improvements identified, and corrective action was recommended. Miscellaneous errors as well that were discovered during the audit and investigated. They were also reported, as well as segregation of duties conflicts, where one person has duties that they're just not compatible, the two duties together within one person. Audit follow-up was performed in these four areas: the tools audit, the telecommunications contract settlement audit, purchasing consortiums, and the Jefferson High School cash handling. Internal audit was involved also in conducting or supporting several investigations throughout the year. And internal audit is currently working with outside counsel for the recovery of funds overcharged by a vendor as previously identified and investigated by internal audit, as you see, seeking recovery of $58,748. The audit plan update for FY 2019. This is a snapshot of the audit plan for the current year ending and shows the audits completed, in progress, and those not completed. I know the numbers are small, but the risk scale, the print is small, but the risk scale is a 1 to 5 risk, with 1 being low and 5 being high risk. The green audits that you see at the top are those that were completed during the year. The blue audits are those that are in progress in the middle. And the pink reddish audits, color there, are those not completed. 3 of those 5 areas have been added to the audit plan for FY 2020. And the audit plan update for FY 2020. These are the audits that are planned for the upcoming fiscal year. It is based, again, on the continually updated risk assessment document. The audit plan for FY 2020 will address 3 areas that were not covered in FY 2019, as well as new areas. The audit plan is a revolving 5-year plan with a focus on the upcoming year and is adjusted each year as the risk assessment is updated. The criteria for creating the risk assessment consists of, there are 8 criteria that are used to quantify the risk faced in departments. And so this slide contains those 8 criteria that are used to update the risk assessment, which is constantly updated to reflect new information or understanding of district processes. General observations. In closing, I'd like to comment that internal audit views information technology and the systems functions as critically important, due to there being the backbone of all the information and all the communication that all departments depend upon. And this includes the administration, the processing, but also the processes of capturing data and reporting on that data. A new area of risk was identified involving student attendance procedures, and this has been addressed in the FY 2020 audit plan. And cash management and fundraising at the schools have been added to the audit plan for coverage every year due to the ongoing risks in those areas. And as training and controls improve, risk would be expected to decrease. This would conclude the presentation and give time for questions.
Mr. Rollins.
couple of questions. On the accounts payable issue, I'm a little surprised that we have duplicate vendor payments. I would think that our system wouldn't allow that. So, what was the process failure, and like what was the percentage of failure out of what you audited?
I don't have that number with me. It was the percentage failure was very low. Those numbers were determined by doing a data analysis where I actually went through and scraped through that data looking for invoice numbers that were not entered correctly. So the control for that area is that invoice numbers can't be paid twice.
Right.
So I was able to go through all of that data and look for matching or very similar invoice numbers that had matching information, matching payment, clearly a duplicate, and some of those were large transactions. There was just a handful of transactions, so there were not a large number of them, but that was the total amount that was accumulated.
And then the other question I had, you just mentioned briefly in passing that you had looked over some of your previous year audit issues, facilities tools audit, AT&T communications contract settlement audit, but you didn't say, whether there were any issues that were flagged by it?
No, I did not flag any issues. Let's say it this way, the fixes were in place or in progress, and so there were no issues that were identified as problematic
thanks.
and ongoing.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah. So I want to go back to something Mr. Rollins asked for. So in the duplicates, what hits my mind, being an IT guy forever, is that those invoice numbers should be generated, right? I mean, if you describe the problem correctly, somebody had 1,000 and 1,001, and they typed it in wrong, right?
Yes.
So I would think that the systems we have would cover that. So I'm kind of surprised. I mean, unless, is this an invoice number that we get from somebody, and can we not get a data import? Or so, one of my things would be the root cause of that problem. I mean, anything with data entry is always subject to problems. So I would think that we'd want to put a note on root cause and say, hey,
I don't have the information in front of me as well, but there were very few of those out of the thousands that we produce every single year.
It wasn't a criticism,
but there was keying errors in order for that not to be caught. So
Right.
there were keying errors in that file, that field. So it does, there's a chance, so internal controls can reduce it to an acceptable level, but to get it to zero is very difficult, but it's,
I totally understand it. It was more the root cause part.
Yes,
and I'm
it was
surprised
key.
there aren't more other, anytime you have a lot of manual entry, especially on finance. So that would be one comment. And I looked at the audit plan on the risk assessment score. Now, those scores are the ones that you generated on the 1 to 5, right?
Yes.
Okay. So when I look at the user security, so that's a 3.5, then I think only construction is more, probably for good reason. But I noticed that user security was one of the areas, and we had an incident. So I think one of the questions I have is that, in terms of the follow-up on that, have we gone through the standards enough where that 3.5 is kind of what you've seen it as, and that if we apply the standards that you've recommended, it'll bring it to I'm making it up, a 2.5 or whatever?
Yes.
I mean, do we have a sense of?
Yes.
We do. Okay, so in the recommendations, we know what our target is out of that.
It's not been quantified as a risk assessment target, but the recommendations overall for the cybersecurity framework audit will very effectively, if they're followed, will very effectively lower that risk, yes.
Okay. I think some of these, so one of the things I would really recommend is, because I'm glad you had the stats, and this is fairly terse, which is great, but I think it wouldn't be a bad thing, and thank you, by the way, because this is clearly something that we've really wanted for a while, is to maybe comment on some of the areas. I think some of the things where they are higher risk, I think it would be good to say, and I was looking at this, it says, internal audit conducted, report issued. I mean, and while that's fair, it might be, assuming we do everything, we're headed to a much lower score. We've, ameliorated these risks, or some comment. And I know you want to be short, so I don't want, 10 lines, but I really think some sense of where we're headed on some of these, especially the higher risk, at least for me. I'm only speaking for me. And then the other part is the construction. That is, I assume, a result of our large, particularly the new schools. So is that an ongoing number, that 3.8? You think that?
That again, that's a subjective number that's based on.
Absolutely.
Based on the information known. I don't think that that's ongoing, but once this process has been performed, as far as the audit that has been performed, that assessment will go down, because we'll have, for example, the time since last audit, if nothing else, would drop that as we gain a better understanding of the controls and their functionality in that area.
Yeah, and I think, again, similar to what Mr. Rollins said, is that the follow-up on the prior years, I think some statement on this, and so let me pick on the AT&T contract settlement, is would be something like, to avoid this going forward, do these 3 steps, or something. The audit reports I'm used to seeing, even in highlight, will say, and maybe this is a few extra slides, I think the one that's got the most risk, I'm making this up, is the AT&T, and here's what we can do. We've recommended these 4 things. And then the one that really strikes my eye, because we spent a bit of time on it, was the Jefferson High School cash handling. And if, from an audit standpoint, you feel that structurally across all the schools, because we're really not picking on one school. This is really a question of what are all the schools doing. So some kind of at least statement that would say, we've done it here, but it could be replicated anywhere. Therefore, our standard process, is following, and we're going to hold us to account on that. So I think, when will we know about the recovery of the $58,000 on the vendor side?
That is ongoing. I don't have a timetable on that.
Okay.
I fear I'll say the wrong thing if I give a time.
Okay. I think the only thing I would want to say there.
Can I suggest that if we get any updated information, we'll include that in the superintendent's weekly update?
Yeah. I think this is one of those where, particularly when you say to somebody like me, data integrity, I mean, my mind goes a lot of places, and, a master list is something that could very well have issues. We may have other kinds of issues, and I'm glad we're using data analysis, so that's good. So we may want to have, essentially, and maybe you've got this, standing monthlies that go after some of this before and after, or some criteria to look at things that might be out of whack. So that would be a follow-up that I would expect. So, yep.
I'm just going to ask, first of all, let me say thank you for having the school fundraiser cash management still on there, because that's a priority for me. I know you meet with me routinely, and I just wondered whether or not other board members have the opportunity to meet with you as well, because I don't really know the answer to that. So I'm going to ask you that question.
I have an open door to talk with several board members. I've talked with several through on different occasions. Tried to set up some appointments.
Okay.
Obviously talked with you. I had talked with Jude about meeting together, and even this evening talked earlier before the meeting about my desire to meet with board members and discuss their concerns about risks.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Thank you. Okay, great job. We'll now move on to the consent portion of the agenda. including the meeting minutes from June 26th, the special board meeting, June 25th and June 11th, payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders for fiscal year 19, purchase orders for fiscal year 20, construction bid request logs and travel, the bid recommendations for asbestos abatement at Dennis, King, Nelson, and New Milford school buildings, the recurring contracts for McGuire Woods, the addendum to the May 2017 UPN contract, authorization for fiber installation, Telesolutions Consultants, Innovative Education Ombudsman Program, Youth Services Network recurring contract, the recurring contract for NWEA for map testing, recurring contract for Consortium for Educational Change for SIG services at Kennedy Middle School, the Linking Talent with Opportunity MOU with Rock Valley College, the Rock Valley Facility contract for fiscal year 20, Rockford University Education Pathways, the Illinois Association of School Administration contract, the consolidated contracts that Dr. Vosberg presented, the other consent items including the intergovernmental agreement by and between ISBE and Rockford Public Schools, and the Freedom of Information log. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Rollins. Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Mr. Rollins?
9B, 9E, and 9G.
Okay. Mr. Dixon?
9I.
Okay. Mr. Siegel?
7A.
Okay. I'm sorry.
That's all
I
right.
didn't see your light.
That's all right.
Okay.
9C,
Okay, 9C.
9C.
Okay. Is that it?
Yep.
Okay. Have the coordinator then call the roll on the consent items not pulled.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay. We'll start with 7A. I have a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes from the 26th, the 25th, and 11th of June.
So moved.
By
Second.
Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Rollins. Any questions or discussion?
I'm assuming that I can't just abstain from 1/3 of these minutes,
Okay.
right?
Okay. Okay. So you want to abstain from one of these meetings? Is that? All right, okay. All right, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 7A.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Abstain.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 1 abstain.
Thank you. 9B is next. That's the addendum to the May 2017 UPN contract.
So
For
moved.
fiber installation motion by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Rollins. Questions or discussion? Mr. Rollins?
I just wanted confirmation. So the executive summary says that this is part of the facilities budget. So was this part of the build budget that the board originally approved for this facility?
Good evening. We worked real close with Mr. Phillips on ensuring that this cost was covered in that budget originally, yes.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? If not, Mr. Connor?
Just very quickly, I assume this is the standard setup that we've got across all the district buildings, so there's nothing special?
No, there's nothing special. So when we signed a 10-year contract with the UPN in 2017 to build the fiber infrastructure
Right.
from the building here to all the facilities, and this is just bringing that new facility online.
Okay, so there's no problem with special repeaters or anything else on this? We're just extending the fiber and using the lines that are already there, that kind of thing?
So there'll be construction of the fiber from this building that'll happen. It's about a 120-day process to get on that construction schedule from this building to be able to trench that fiber over to the new location.
Okay.
And then the equipment that's at the current facility will be relocated to the new facility.
Okay.
Okay, have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 9B, the UPN contract addendum.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins? The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, I'll take a motion in a second for the 9C, which is the telesolutions consultant.
So moved.
Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Rollins. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Connor?
So, Mr. Bartel, I'm going to ask you to come back up. Just briefly, can you tell people the importance of this? I think a lot of us have heard about the E-rate filings and the rest, but I think it's always a good time when we have this renewal for us to at least have a short explanation on why this is important.
Absolutely. So just to go back, to remind everybody what E-rate is, in 1997, E-rate, or educational rate, was started by the federal government. It was actually called the GORE tax back then, and what they did, and we all pay for it. So there's a surcharge that comes on your personal or business cell or internet that basically builds in this pool of money at the federal government. And what happens, there's a couple different categories. Category 1, which is your internet services, your phone services for the school district, and there's Category 2, which is equipment and infrastructure to provide fast and easy access to internet for students. And what happens is what we do, we budget every year for paying those monthly bills for internet service or upgrading our infrastructure. And what the E-rate process does is allow us to recoup some of that money. Because we're a CEP school, we get the max rate, so it's 90% reimbursement for the internet services as well as the phone services. I believe it's an 85% reimbursement rate for any infrastructure like switches at the different schools.
What was it called originally, please?
It was actually originally called the GORE tax back in 1997 when it originally came out.
Gore,
Yes, as in Al Gore.
And Al Gore. Okay. Have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 9C.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins? Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
I'll now take a motion for item 9E, the Youth Services Network recurring contract.
So moved.
Second.
Connor, Mr. Rollins, questions or discussion? Mr. Rollins?
There's a lot of words here. I'm just trying to figure out what I'm voting on. So we use Youth Services Network for truancy services. We also use them for behavioral intervention specialists and some other things as well. And what's throwing me off a little bit, I guess, is that in the executive summary it says schools using YSN services as follows, and it only lists 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of our elementary schools. I would have thought we were using them district-wide. Can somebody explain that to me?
Yes. So we've added, what's new, this is a recurring contract, but what's added new this time are the positions that are called trauma therapists. And those are the schools that you see itemized are the schools that are getting that new position. And that's why they did an executive summary, because it's a new spend for them.
But what we're approving is the entire contract for everything, and this is just the schools that are going to use the new trauma specialists. Okay. That was not really clear.
If you go to Appendix B in one of the in the attachment, you'll see the itemization of the staffing. So there's 12 truancy staff. There's 10 BIS specialists. There's 1 transition advocate, which we talked about earlier. That's with JDC. We talked at a previous board meeting. And then there's the 6.5 trauma therapists.
I apologize for not having read appendix there.
Okay.
Exhibit
I
B
know
to
there's a
one
lot.
of the-
There's a lot to read. I know.
Yeah,
Yes.
sure. Any other questions, comments? Ms. McCulloch?
He was first.
Oh, no. Oh, go.
Well, I just don't think that was fair, because it clearly says schools utilizing YSN services as follows.
It could have been worded better. Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah, I think that this is one, because there is so much money involved. I know when we originally did this that there was some, a little bit of controversy on this. I think this is one because it is a large dollar amount. I think really having some metrics that are visible and regular really would help on this particular one because there's a lot going on. And so, I mean, I'd be for this program, but I think having, if the focus and the visibility is the part that I think that would help.
Right. I do remember the initial contract was adopted right before I came in.
Right.
I remember there was concern because it was replacing current district employees.
Right.
We do have an attachment with data on attendance and discipline added, if you looked.
Yeah.
Where it says YSN
The
data.
YSN data, yeah.
So those are the metrics that we're using to support these positions, and this is the work that they're hired to do.
Okay, so all right, so the metrics, and I know that they had, I will say, I went through this quickly. I think it was more, and I knew there's the one that says due to interventions. I think making sure that we have direct lines on some of this is really helpful. Saying it's due to this, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mr. Rollins?
I was just going to comment, it may have been before your time, I didn't remember that, but it wasn't before my time or Mr. Scrivano's or Mrs. McCulloch's, and it was controversial. And, but we did see an almost immediate drop in our truancy numbers, and as you do point out in this executive summary, our truancy numbers are now below the state average. So I think this is actually one of the success stories that we've had, and I'm fully supportive of Youth Services Network. I just didn't understand the reference to only 6 schools getting their services.
Right. That could have been worded better. Yeah.
Okay, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the
Excuse
approval of
me?
9E, YSN. Oh, Ms. McCulloch?
And just to attach on, and it came to Ed Committee, and you guys did all these reports, and it came repeatedly, but when we do have things that work and are a success, sometimes it's nice to actually take a minute to shout that out and let everybody know, and YSN deserves it. I see you there.
Absolutely.
Thank you, good job. Okay, thank you.
Okay, she's here too. Okay, all right. Okay, I'll have the coordinator call the roll on approval of the YSN contract, 9E.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins.
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano.
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Next one is item 9G, the recurring contract for consortium for educational change. I have a motion for that.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Rollins. Questions or discussion?
So my question is, we know this is not a success. I just want somebody to tell me we don't have any choice, but we have to vote for this. Yeah. We know this has not been a successful program, but we're going to dump another $225,000 into it. And I'm assuming you're going to tell me, Dr. Wolf, that we don't have any choice. Okay. I just want you to tell me that.
Under the grant that was accepted 4 years ago, we agreed to a 5-year program that included a lead partner. The Consortium for Educational Change was selected as that lead partner. The change going forward into this school year is you have a new principal, and Dr. Vosberg met with Ms. Redmond about the services that the CEC would provide in the coming year, and they actually do have a different staffing model, which is to say that there is some hope, but I would concur with your general assessment.
Okay, how's that for an answer?
So does that mean we didn't have an out to go with someone else, that we are committed for the 5 years?
Yes.
Who wrote that contract?
It's the grant.
It's contingent upon receiving the SIG grant, the school improvement grant. You pick a lead partner and a 5-year strategy, right? What we did do is decrease the number of days so that we could put those resources, and we used those resources in different ways in the building this year.
Okay, thank you. Have the coordinator then call the roll for the approval of item 9G, the CEC contract.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins, Mr. Scrivano.
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch.
Yes.
Mr. Siegel.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, the next item is item 9I, which is the Rock Valley facility contract. Motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor, second.
Second.
Mr. Dixon. Questions or discussion? Mr. Dixon.
Yes, I poured this one because anytime we have the ability to use our own edifices, I believe we should use it. So with this one, it's going to Rock Valley. I'm wondering why we didn't use Auburn, we didn't use Eisenhower, anywhere else to go and save those couple of dollars.
Mrs. Alt.
Those are great questions. As you noticed, there are many different events that we needed to include. One of them being our Teacher Institute Day in August. There are 2 days worth. We have used up to 7, I believe, facilities off the top of my head of our current facilities. Where our limitations are is because it's in the summer, we have air conditioning issues throughout our district, so we need air-conditioned spaces and parking allotments, which kind of limits our availability of how many classrooms and spaces we can use. The other thing that also drives part of this conversation is the kind of spaces that we need for adult learning. A lot of them need to be in larger spaces for the large venues. Most of them need to be in collaborative spaces where you can have tables, not desks. And so it's a variety of a mix of different reasons why we're utilizing a different facility for different reasons.
I get that, but I was looking at Jefferson. Jefferson has the space and the air conditioning that we can probably use.
And we have filled Jefferson, at least for our Teachers Institute Day, and that is one of the, I think, 6 or 7 facilities that we have, that we've used during that time.
Because we have, what, 1, 2, 3, 4 events that's posted here. I just think that we can do something else.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval.
So from a legal perspective, because what's going to happen is all year long, every time they want to go to RVC, they're just going to say it's a recurring contract because you already have a contract with them and you've gone. So if we approve a contract for something specific, such as this facility, then the next time somebody wants to use it, it just comes back as a recurring contract because we've used it for something else.
So in our regulations, we define a recurring contract for a specific expenditure within a certain time frame. I believe it's within 1 or 2 years we've, expended funds on that same or similar type of arrangement with an entity. Just because it's a recurring contract doesn't mean the board has to approve it. You still can say that you prefer not to engage or sign that agreement.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Right. I pulled a couple this last year when they came up under recurring contracts. And I said, well, why is that a recurring contract? This is a new contract for a different day, a different rental. And they said, because we've rented with them before, it's called recurring. And to me, it's a new contract because we're choosing a new day and a new...
It simply means to expedite the contract review process. So for those who aren't aware, I'm sure you are, Ms. McCulloch, but for those who aren't aware, if it's not a recurring contract, it will have to be presented to the board twice. You'll have an initial reading and then a vote at a later date. This is just a means to expedite the process for facilities or agreements that you've kind of seen before or you would be familiar with. But it still doesn't diminish the board's authority at all to decline to enter into the agreement.
Did we go here last year for Teacher Institute?
We did, and we also did for new teacher orientation for those 2 days.
By the way, the parking there is not so great right now.
We're hoping so, yes.
Okay. Have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 9I, the Rock Valley facility contract.
Mr. Dixon?
No.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses and 1 no.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the closed session consent agenda items, including the following appointments. The appointment of Brett Vosberg, no relation to Dr. Vosberg, as a 12-month Director of Special Education. The appointment of Michael Rhea as the 12-month Director of Special Education. The appointment of Laura Blackwell as an 11-month Early Childhood Principal at Byer. The appointment of Kimberly Ward as an 11-month Elementary Principal at Froberg. Appointment of Megan Green as a 10-month Assistant Principal at Barber. The appointment of Catherine Kohler as a 10-month Elementary Assistant Principal at Washington. the appointment of Brandy Fago as a 10-month assistant principal at Flynn Middle School, and the HR organizational report and addendum. Is there a motion and a second to approve these closed session consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Dixon. Are there any items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the closed session consent items listed under 11.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We are now on to action items for tonight's meetings. Our first item is item 12A, which is the acceptance of lockers. Is there a motion and a second to approve these lockers?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Dixon. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Just one quick, thank you for the donations, always appreciated.
All right. Yeah. Okay, please call the roll.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next action item is the architecture and engineering design fees. Is there a motion and a second to approve item 12B?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Dixon. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Rollins.
Yeah, I had asked the question of Mr. Phillips earlier, why we have to actually completely redesign this, and he had an answer for me, so maybe you should just share
Sure.
that with everyone.
Leaks.
Our current atrium design. The design trend has been moving away from the sloped structural glazing system for a few different reasons. One, durability over time. Another one is ongoing maintenance issues with the flashings and sealants. And lastly, condensation and water infiltration issues. Architects have really been moving towards a vertical curtain wall design, much like what we've presented as a recommendation to move forward with.
Okay. Any other questions? Have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 12B, the architecture and engineering design for this building.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Third action item is the IGA intergovernmental agreement donation of smart boards to the Winnebago School District 323. Is there a motion and a second to approve this item?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Dixon. Any questions or discussions? Now I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 12C.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Getting punchy up here. Yeah, okay.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Another seating chart.
I know, I'm going to have to move you guys around. Our next four items are board policies, so unless anyone disagrees, I'd like to do them as a group. Oh, there is 5, I'm sorry. Correction. All right. Everybody okay with that? So I'll take a motion and a second then to approve the board policy revisions.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Rollins. Any questions or discussions? Seeing none, I'll coordinate and then call the roll on the approval of items D, E, F, G, and H, which are board policy revisions for board policies 4.150, 5.100, 6.15, 7.100, and board policy 7.250.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, we are now on to our final action item for tonight, which is the Subdistrict G selection and administration of the oath of office to new board member June Stanford. Is there a motion and a second to approve this item and appoint June Stanford as the Subdistrict G selection for the board?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? If not, please call the roll. Did you have a comment? No. Okay, please call the roll on the approval of Ms. Stanford as the Subdistrict G board member.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Ms. Stanford, you may come up to the front here. Do you have a copy of this long? All right, okay. You can stand right here. So you need to raise your right hand. Okay. I state your name.
I, June Stanford,
Do solemnly swear
solemnly swear
that I will faithfully discharge the duties
that I will faithfully discharge the duties
of the office of member of the Board of Education for RPS 205.
of the office
Of the member.
of member of
Yeah.
the Board of Education of RPS 205,
Winnebago, Boone Counties, Illinois,
Winnebago, Boone Counties, Illinois,
in accordance with the Constitution of the United States,
in accordance with the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and the laws of the State of Illinois,
and the laws of the State of Illinois,
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
I further swear that
I further swear that
I shall respect taxpayer interests
I shall respect taxpayer interests
by serving as a faithful protector
by serving as a faithful protector
of the school district's
of the
assets.
school district's assets.
I shall encourage and respect the free expression
I shall encourage and respect the free expression
of opinion by my fellow board members
of opinion by my fellow board members
and others who seek a hearing before the board,
and others who seek a hearing before the board,
while respecting the privacy of students and
while
employees.
respecting the privacy of students and employees.
I shall recognize that a board member
I shall recognize that a board member
has no legal authority as an individual,
has no legal authority as an individual,
and that decisions can be made only
and that decisions can be made only
by a majority vote at a public board meeting.
by a majority vote at a public board meeting.
I shall abide by majority decisions of the board
I shall abide by majority decisions of the board
while retaining the right to seek
while
changes
retaining the right to seek changes
in such decisions through ethical and constructive channels
in such decisions through ethical and constructive channels.
as part of the Board of Education.
As part of the Board of Education,
I shall accept the responsibility for my role
I shall accept the responsibility for my role
in the equitable and quality education of every student in the school district.
in the equitable and quality education of every student in the school district.
We're almost there, halfway. Okay. I shall foster with the board
I shall foster with the board
extensive participation of the community,
extensive participation of the community,
formulate goals,
formulate goals,
define outcomes,
define outcomes,
and set the course for the Rockford School District 205,
and set the course for Rockford School District 205,
Winnebago, Boone County, Illinois.
Winnebago, Boone County, Illinois.
I shall assist in establishing a structure
I shall assist in establishing a structure
and an environment designed to ensure all students
and an environment designed to ensure all students
have the opportunity to obtain their maximum potential
have the opportunity to attain their maximum potential
through a sound organizational framework.
through a sound organizational framework.
I shall strive to ensure a continuous assessment
I shall strive to ensure a continuous assessment
of student achievement
of student achievement
and all conditions affecting the education
and all conditions affecting the education
of our children in compliance with state law.
of our children in compliance with state law.
I shall serve as education's key advocate
I shall serve as education's key advocate
on behalf of students and our community schools
on behalf of students in our community schools
to advance the vision of the Rockford School District 205, Winnebago, Boone County, Illinois.
to advance the vision for Rockford School District 205.
I shall strive to work together with the district superintendent
I shall strive to work together with the district superintendent
to lead the school district toward fulfilling the vision
to lead the school district toward fulfilling the vision
the board has created,
the board has created,
fostering excellence for every student
fostering excellence for every student
in the areas of academic skills,
in the areas of academic skills,
knowledge, citizenship, and personal development.
knowledge, citizenship, and personal development.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you may take your seat next to Mrs. McCullough. We're now on to
Mr.
new
President,
business.
before you move on,
Yes,
I'm allowed before she sat. I wanted to thank the 4 people who did interview for this position. It was really encouraging to see 4 people enthusiastically step forward to make themselves available for this position. And welcome, June. And I also want to recognize Ms. Diana Walker, who is sitting in the audience tonight, participating in this meeting as a community member. Thank you very much.
Well said, thank you. Yeah, they deserve it. We appreciate everyone stepping up. We are now on to new business. How do you always get at the end? Okay. Ms. French is going to present our first item, which is the Incubator Edu Grant Acceptance.
I do not have a formal presentation this evening, but good evening. My name is Bridget French. I'm the Executive Director of College and Career Readiness. We received an opportunity from the Coleman Foundation to apply for a grant to support the incubator courses that you previously approved that we're launching in all of our comprehensive high schools. We applied for the maximum grant amount, which was $30,000. They called me and said, we see that you have 4 schools. Would you be interested in $40,000 so you could give 10 to each school? So of course I said yes.
Okay.
So before you is the grant acceptance for incubator, which will help offset the costs of implementation of that course.
Okay, any questions for Bridget? Okay, this will come to the board for our vote on our August 13th meeting. Thank you, Bridget. And Dr. Vosberg, consolidated contracts.
All right, these are new business contracts. We have not used these previously. There's a total spend of, I believe, $45,000 between.
Bless you, we got the sneezes.
Between Dreambox, Freco, and IXL. These are all software programs, online-based, to help support math in our schools. I don't have anything to add.
Questions or comments for Dr. Vosberg? Okay, this will come to us for a vote on the August 13th board meeting. Any other business for this evening? Any other comments?
Just like to say welcome to June.
Yeah, how about that? Great. All right, if there are no other agenda items, I'll take a motion and a second for adjournment.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion, same sign. We are adjourned at 8:15.